everybody. Thanks for braving the weather to be with us tonight. It's a fascinating topic, so I don't blame you. I'm really interested to see Parker's talk. There are a few seats still scattered here and there. If you don't mind scooting to let folks in. Just some housekeeping things first. I'm Sandy Gordon, the director of the Ethics Center, so welcome. We do have a table outside with some goodies for you. We have a flyer for our next talk. We have a sign-up sheet if you want to be on our email list and what else is still coming up the rest of the semester. We also have a sign-in sheet, a hard copy for those of you who are from the med school who are here for credit. If you're a Western Michigan University student, swipe in with your ID. Okay, that's going to give you signature credit. And if you're also here for extra credit from an instructor, just let them know that they need to ask us for the list, okay, from the credit from the card swipe. They can email ethicscenter, all one word, at wmich.com. Basically, send us a list, and we can find you on the list. Okay. So again, Western Michigan University students, swipe in with your ID. If you're from the med school, we have a sign-in sheet, hard copy that you can sign. And I think that's no good. Okay. All right. Great. So I do want to plug our next event. Actually, that's our next speaker. Just where is he, Charlie? So Charlie Kurth, Associate Professor of Philosophy, will be speaking exactly 1 month from today on March 12th at 6 p.m. in 211 Bernhardt. So I think that's the same room. Yes? Okay. So same place. Almost the same day, different time. Okay. So another fascinating talk called "Should Politicians Be Anxious?" I know, I'm intrigued too. So definitely hoping that you'll join us for that as well. Again, we have a flyer for Charlie's talk outside, so you can pick that up on the way out. I'd also like to acknowledge our co-sponsors for tonight's talk, the Western Michigan University Stryker MD School of Medicine. Whole thing okay. And also Western Michigan University's Department of Psychology. So thank you. Parker Crutchfield is an associate professor in the program in Medical Humanities, Ethics, and Law. I'm not going to say the whole thing yet at the med school. He received his bachelor's degree in philosophy at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor, our neighbor. He completed his PhD in philosophy at Arizona State University, working in applied ethics, epistemology, and the philosophy of science. Following graduate school, he was assistant professor of ethics and the inaugural director of research at the Missouri School of Dentistry and Oral Health at A.T. Still University, a school that he helped found. As associate professor in the program in medical ethics, humanities, law at WMed, Dr. Crutchfield conducts clinical ethics consultations, teaches medical students and residents, and conducts research in medical ethics. And the title of his talk is Making People Better, Saving Us from Ourselves. Moral enhancement. Without further ado.
Great. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for getting out here in the poor weather. So, just to start, I'll confess that I started this project about 4 years ago, and it was simply an exercise in seeing what I could get away with, what the medical ethics literature would allow me to do. And so I tried to occupy an extreme position, and then I ended up believing that it was right. So that's sort of how the project started. Now, usually when I present this idea to others, the first question they ask is he serious? And the answer to that is most definitely yes, I am serious. And then that's usually met with some degree of horror. And so what I'm hoping to do is mitigate any horror that you might feel about what I'm about to say and convince you that, in fact, I am right. So that's the goal. Most of what I will say comes from 2 papers that I published both in bioethics, and then a third paper which is currently under review. And so if you want the nitty-gritty details, the philosophical details, you can find those in these 2 papers. Okay. So I'm aiming to establish 3 claims. The first is that we should engage in moral bioenhancement. Right? So this is a pretty weak claim. We should do this. So moral bioenhancement is the biological intervention on another person's moral capacities. Right? So we're doing something to a person to change their moral behavior. Now, maybe we'll do this through manipulating their emotion. Maybe we'll do it by manipulating their thought. Maybe we'll do it by manipulating their motivation. I'm silent on the psychological mechanisms that we use to induce the manipulation and produce the targeted behavior. Whatever way psychologically works is compatible with what I'm about to say. We can also think of moral bioenhancement as interacting at sort of two different levels. One is a direct intervention. So this would be a manipulation that we give something to someone, for instance, oxytocin, that produces moral states that we want them to have. So we target certain moral states and we give them something to induce those. That's a direct. So example is oxytocin, which is a neuropeptide that makes people more generous or more altruistic. The evidence is sort of ambiguous about this. It does seem to increase social bonding, but it's regulated by in-group, out-group interactions. So it has a tendency to produce antisocial behavior between people in different groups, whereas it will increase pro-social behavior for people within the same social group. The going hypothesis is that it's because it makes social cues more similar. So if there's a cue that might cause someone to be antisocial, oxytocin will make that cue more salient and then make it more likely that the person will behave in response to it. Another potential moral bioenhancement is vasopressin, which is associated with greater sociability in non-human primates. There are lots of reasons to think that that research won't translate to humans, but there is some limited evidence that higher levels of vasopressin correlate with higher levels of sociability. And then there are other potential substances like SSRIs and psilocybin that probably have less chance of working. I'm silent on which of these are going to be the actual moral bioenhancer, what the substance is going to be end up being that we use to make people better. It's probably not any of these. It's probably a long way off. But given some of the other substances that show some evidence of influencing a person's moral behavior, I'm optimistic that probably in our lifetime we'll come up with something. That can be, this is a direct manipulation. There are also indirect manipulations. So this might be something like cognitive enhancement. Cognitive enhancement is much more developed than moral enhancement. So this is a pill that would essentially make someone smarter, better at reasoning. And so the one thought is that by making people smarter, we'll make them better at moral reasoning. So they'll go through the process of moral reasoning more easily. They might be more sensitive to evidence, moral evidence, and use that to make inferences resulting in better moral action. Then something even more indirect might be conditioning. So we find a substance that will cause a person to vomit when they lie, so that they over time don't want to vomit, so they don't lie. These are all the different possibilities. And so what I'm assuming that we'll find one of them. All right, maybe it's not going to be any of these. We'll find something that works. Moreover, we'll find something that's safe. So that's just an underlying assumption that we're going to find a substance that is effective and safe. Maybe that won't happen, maybe it will. I think it's an empirical question, not a conceptual question. I don't think it's a conceptual question that moral bioenhancement is impossible or unlikely. I think that's an empirical question. So that's the first thing. We should engage in moral bioenhancement. The second is where things start getting a little bit controversial, and that's receiving moral bioenhancement should be mandatory. So you should be mandated to get it. And then third, you shouldn't know that you're getting it. That's the kicker right there. It should be obligatory, compulsory, but it also should be done without your knowledge. So that's the one I'm really going to defend is number 3. I'm not going to defend 2 as much. I'll nod to it, but it's been defended at length by Ingmar Persson and Julian Sadulescu in a series of papers in a very good book about 10 years ago. I'll sort of give background on it, but I'm going to be spending most of my time talking about number 3. So this is a recent headline from February 1st. Trump administration withdraws from nuclear weapons treaty. accuses Russia of violations. This is just the first of many ways that we are very close to being wiped out. Nuclear war between nations. We could also be wiped out by biological weapons, chemical weapons, maleficent AI. Someone like Osama bin Laden now has a lot of access, or much more access to things like this. It's much easier for nefarious actors to get their hands on these sorts of things: nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. 100 years ago, they didn't have access to that. The most a person could do was take out a rifle or a knife and pretty slowly kill a large group of people. Now, all it takes is one bad actor and access to one weapon of mass destruction to potentially wipe us all out. So we're much closer to that. And part of that is because of advances in technology. Part of it might also be due to cognitive enhancement, so that has a dual danger. So by making people smarter, we make them better at doing bad things, to the extent that intelligence permits that. It doesn't have to be a bad actor, though. Right? So these are examples of someone doing a bad thing because they want to do something bad. Someone might also just be morally negligent. So this is from last week, just a few days ago. The CDC announced that they are going, and the NIH announced that they're going to permit the resumption of lab studies that are going to make bird flu, that they're going to create a strain of bird flu that is resistant to the vaccine, the developed vaccine, and more deadly and easily transmitted between humans. So they say it's safe, it's going to be confined to the lab. Cross your fingers. This leans more towards a conspiracy theory, but there are some physicists who, and I'm not endorsing this view, but some people are very worried that the Large Hadron Collider is going to cause a black hole. Those are just examples of maybe moral negligence. Then there's everyone's favorite, climate change. This is probably going to be the thing that kills us all, or at least kills all of our children and grandchildren. This is a headline from yesterday. Insects are dying en masse, risking catastrophic collapse of Earth's ecosystems. When the insects die, we die. If you're familiar with the doomsday clock, over time for about the past 60 years, it's ranged somewhere between 11:45 p.m. and this is now the closest it's been to doomsday, 2 minutes. It was at 2 minutes, I think, maybe at 53, and then again at 84 because of the threat of nuclear war. But now we're there at 2 minutes again. So these are all human-caused things, right? So these are things that are happening to us because we're not very good people. At least some subset of us are not very good people. I think we're all not very good people by varying degrees, but some people are worse than others. Now, some sort of catastrophe is guaranteed. The death of the sun is going to happen. Maybe it's not in some distant time, but at some point the sun is going to die. And when the sun dies, whatever is left on Earth is going to die with it. If the sun just burns out, which is almost impossible, I read that it'll take about 2 weeks for every human on Earth to die. Now that's probably not the way it's going to go. Maybe it'll just expand and consume us all. But eventually, we're all going to die. And when it does, things like this are going to happen. We're going to likely be in some sort of science fiction apocalyptic scenario. So I'm saying that very likely these things are inevitable. Maybe it's not going to happen now or in 5 years or 10 years, but we're very close to this. And so the consequence of experiencing all these, and this is a technical term, is ultimate harm, the experience of ultimate harm. And ultimate harm is widespread death and suffering, so much so that it makes living worse than death. Right? So it's as bad as things can get. So how likely is ultimate harm? Well, if any of those things happen, it's pretty likely. At some point, maybe not to us or our generation, but maybe future generations. So we either need to prevent these things from happening and colonize other solar systems, right, because we have the definite sun coming down the pipe, or we need to become disembodied, which is probably in the very distant future, if we're not already disembodied. So why is it not if? Well, one, because too many of us are much like this guy, just lounging on the couch, eating Cheetos, playing video games, not really caring. Too many of us are doing things that continue global warming and contributing to climate change. And we absolutely cannot rely on our elected leaders to do anything about it. It's pretty hopeless. So maybe that's why politicians should be anxious, because they are, well, maybe they shouldn't. So the basic idea is that more bad people have better access to more harmful means of destruction, and we need to prevent that. If we want to prevent that, we need to do something about it. Now, the position that Sevulescu in person take is that moral bioenhancement is necessary to do that. If we want to prevent the next Osama bin Laden from releasing a nuclear bomb in New York City, then we need to make sure that everyone has their moral capacities in hand, so that there is no person that thinks it's appropriate to do that sort of thing. What I also say relies on a pretty intuitive principle that has been, some people dispute it, I'll take it for granted here, and that's that if we can prevent something very bad from happening without sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance, we ought to do that thing. It seems pretty intuitive, we might find good reasons to reject it, but it seems right that if you can save a drowning child from dying without doing anything that's going to cause you to sacrifice anything of your own that matters, you should save the child. And so if we can prevent this ultimate harm from occurring without sacrificing anything of comparable significance, then we should do that. And my claim, and Sevulescu and person's claim, is that moral bioenhancement meets this condition. We don't have to sacrifice anything of comparable moral significance to do that. Okay, so some might think that voluntary moral bioenhancement is okay, that might meet the challenge, but really we don't need to be concerned about the volunteers for moral bioenhancement, because they're the people who want to get better. We should be concerned about the people who don't want to get better, right? And those are the people who aren't going to volunteer for moral bioenhancement. Those are the people who need to get it by mandate. Okay, so I'm just going to leave. I'm going to assume that moral bioenhancement ought to be compulsory. We can dispute whether the argument actually establishes that, but I think it's a matter of weighing the utility of not preventing ultimate harm versus the cost of allowing it to happen. Ultimate harm is, by its very nature, almost the worst thing that could happen to us. So, assuming it's going to be compulsory, there are two ways we could do this. One is we could do it overtly, similar to how vaccines are. So vaccines are overtly administered compulsory treatments. Fluoride is another one. Right? So that's compulsory, it's overt. It's put in the water supply, at least for most communities. It's transparently there. I don't think that's what we should do. I think instead we should do it covertly. For instance, administered by way of the water supply. So just like fluoride, put it in the water supply so that everyone gets it. Potentially through HVAC systems of public buildings or packaged with vaccines. So when you go and get your vaccines as a child, there's just another one in there, say with MMR, that is the moral bioenhancement, and that's what you get. And then you get it over a series, like you do all many other vaccines, and over time you become a better person. So that's what I'm arguing for. That to be done at a public health level. So let's just suppose, though, that the program is going to be overt. There are three problems I identified that I think undermine the effectiveness of an overt program. One is the reflection problem, that's what I call it. So our moral reasons in most of our mental states are, I guess we could say, transparent to us. So they're accessible by by introspection. When something happens to us in our mind, we often know that it is happening. And so if we were to overtly manipulate a person's moral beliefs, say, they would recognize that change, but then they wouldn't recognize any change in corresponding change in evidence. So they would just, lo and behold, oh, now I have a belief that eating meat is wrong. But pretty cursory inspection of that belief would reveal to the person that, hey, why do I think that? I don't have any new evidence for that belief. And so because they wouldn't have any new evidence, it would undermine their justification for that belief and make it less likely for them to act upon it, which would undermine the point of moral bioenhancement. That's the first problem. The second problem is what I call moral hallucination, and that's the idea that knowing that your moral intuitions have been manipulated is akin to knowing that you're hallucinating. So you know that someone's messing with your moral judgments. And when you know you're hallucinating, even if you're right, when you know you're hallucinating, it undermines your justification for that belief. So if you know you're hallucinating a pink elephant in the back of the room, there isn't one. Hopefully not, at least to you. When you know you're hallucinating that, whether or not there is a pink elephant is beside the point. The fact that you know you're hallucinating undermines your justification to believe that there is one there, which means that you're not likely going to act on it. Then finally, there's the trustworthiness problem. And this is probably the most intuitive. We just don't think that there are moral experts in the way that we think that there are experts for other things. I'm almost positive that you don't think that ethicists and philosophers are moral experts. Maybe they know more about moral theory, but you don't think that they're experts in morality. And certainly ethicists, I don't think that else. We think that there are scientific experts, medical experts, and we easily defer to them for their judgment, but we don't for moral judgments. So we don't have a profession that has recognized expertise in making moral judgments. And so if someone knows that they're getting moral bioenhancement, they're going to automatically distrust whoever is administering that. And because they're going to distrust whoever is administering that, I think it's going to make them less likely to act on that judgment. So having an overt program would actually, I think, promote the behavior opposite of what we want to induce. They would entrench and say, you know what, this person, I don't trust them. They want me to do this. I'm going to do this instead. Anyways, I think the trustworthiness problem, the moral hallucination problem, and the reflection problem show that an overt program is not going to be effective. If we have the goal of making moral bioenhancement compulsory, administering it overtly is not going to achieve the goal we want it to achieve, which is to prevent ultimate harm. Okay. So now a slight shift. In normal medical ethics or biomedical ethics, especially in medicine, we often put the interests of the patient first, but the values that are at stake in public health ethics shift a little bit. And they don't just take they don't primarily take the interests of the patient, they take the interests of primarily the interests of the public. And if we look at all the different theories of public health ethics, we can identify a few main values, and those are liberty, utility, equality, fairness, transparency, autonomy, trust, and solidarity. We see these promoted or undermined in various public health activities. So vaccines, they promote utility and equality more than they do liberty. Right? So laws requiring you to get vaccines diminish your liberty to some extent. Now we've carved out certain exemptions, but they're not. For those people who don't, say, assert a religious exemption, their liberty is diminished a little bit by being required to get vaccines. Maybe they don't want to get a vaccine. The fact that they're required to diminishes their liberty a little bit. But that's for the sake of others. Quarantine is an even starker example of place. So literally, when someone's quarantined, their liberty to move is diminished. It's taken away. They are not legally allowed to move from one place to another. And that's for the sake of utility of everyone else. And then finally, there's things like, that's the Ann Arbor water treatment plant. Things like fluoride, which take the overall utility as the primary value, right? The prevention of the world's most prevalent but easily preventable diseases, dental caries. There's a lot of utility there. And it does diminish your liberty a little bit. If you don't want to get fluoride, you have to do things to actively avoid it. You have to get non-fluoridated water or live in a community that doesn't fluoridate. So I think that when we look at an overt and a covert program, this is the scorecard from here on out. We'll look at this. I think a covert program wins over an overt program. So it's going to be more effective based on the three problems I identified a moment ago. An overt program is not going to be as effective as a covert program. They're both necessary. So public health programs have to be necessary to achieve, if they're going to diminish a person's liberty, they have to be necessary. So quarantine is necessary is a necessary means of protecting the interests of others. If there were a less liberty restricting way of doing it, we would do it. All right, so on to the good stuff. An overt program would diminish a person's liberty more so than a covert program. An overt program would, remember it's compulsory, an overt program would require fines, taxes, some sort of punishment for not getting it, maybe jail time. So those are liberty restrictions that would come with an overt program, but not with a covert program. A covert program, no one would know they're getting it, so their liberty wouldn't be diminished, at least to the extent that they know. Also, when we are in the apocalypse and we're experiencing ultimate harm, the range of liberties that we have in that case is much lower. There are very few things that we are at liberty to do when most of us are dead and there's no infrastructure. So an overt program, I think, doesn't promote liberties or doesn't diminish, it diminishes liberties more so than a covert program. So if we value liberty, we should want a covert program. It promotes utility more so than an overt program. This is the whole point of having compulsory moral bioenhancement, is to achieve that greater utility of preventing ultimate harm. And at the very end, if I have time, I would say that I would suggest that compulsory moral bioenhancement can also help us achieve utopia. That's my last paper. So I think a covert program better promotes utility. In America, the public health ethics generally the values that are at stake are typically liberty, utility, and equality. Other nations will integrate the other values more, but in the U.S. it's mostly these three. And equality, I think, is better promoted by a covert program. And the reason for that is, if the program is overt, consider the people, suppose we're doing it by way of vaccines. There might be, I think we could expect, a lot of physicians to conscientiously object to it. Probably a lot of them are not going to agree to do it. That's going to result in unequal distribution of the treatment. It also might be, depending on how we organize the program, we may also allow waivers like we do with vaccines. And that's going to also result in unequal distribution of the treatment. If it's covert, if the physicians don't know that what they're injecting into their patients is moral bioenhancement, there's nothing they can object to. If no one knows they're getting it, there's not going to be any waiver that they can sign to exempt them. So I think from a perspective of equality, covert program wins out. One of the biggest concerns about moral bioenhancement is that it will exacerbate income and other social inequalities. I think this is absolutely true in the case of an overt program. If a program is going to be overt and mandatory, rich people are more easily going to be able to avoid it. So they'll be able to more easily afford the fines that are levied. They will be able to hire better lawyers to get them out of jail if that's going to be the punishment. Whereas groups that have fewer resources are not going to be able to avoid those. So that if it's overt, it's going to result in an unfair distribution of resources, an unfair distribution of the moral bioenhancement, where the rich people essentially are going to be more able to avoid it if they want to. All right, so far we have covert money now on, in my view, liberty, utility, equality, and fairness. Transparency, that's pretty obvious, right? The overt program pretty obviously wins out on that. So no need to talk about that more. Trust, I think that there's a possibility for, if a covert program were revealed, trust in the government or whatever organization is administering it would evaporate. That wouldn't happen. It wouldn't be as likely to happen in an overt program. So I think we'll give trust to the overt program. And then finally, solidarity. In an overt program, just imagine the protests on the mall when the government or whoever said, you know what, now you all need to get shots to make you better people. That would really promote a lot of solidarity. And so I think an overt program wins on that. So if we're taking an intermediate assessment of the scorecard, we have it's basically 6 to 4, well, 5 to 3 if we throw out necessary. But there's a last one, and it's a pretty important one, and it's the one that is the source of a lot of objections towards moral bioenhancement, and that's what it does to our autonomy. So autonomy requires roughly 2 things. It requires power and authenticity. So it requires power, control over your actions. It requires the absence of coercion. It requires to basically you be able to do what you want to do. And we don't know, well, I don't think it will, but even if compulsory moral bioenhancement results in the diminishment of autonomy, it's not because it's covert or overt, it's because it's compulsory, it's because it's mandatory. Because if they undermine autonomy, it's in virtue of the fact that you don't have a choice in the matter. And so it's a wash when it comes to this condition for autonomy. They both, I don't think it does, but if they undermine autonomy in virtue of undermining a person's control or power, they do so equally. But when it comes to authenticity, an overt program is less likely to promote authenticity. And the reason is, if you are getting if you have new moral judgments or new moral capacities, I think it's unlikely, and you know they're coming from a shot or from some other administration, I think it's unlikely or more likely that you will think of them as not your own. You will find them foreign to you, they will feel inauthentic to you. You won't think of them as yours, or you'll more likely have that thought. But if you don't know you're getting them, it's not going to undermine any sort of feeling that they're not yours. You will recognize them as your own, just as you would any other thought. And so I think if we're worried about autonomy, I actually think a covert program promotes autonomy more so than a overt program, because it promotes or preserves the authenticity component of autonomy. Okay, so now if we look at the scorecard, it's looking pretty largely in favor of a covert program, but there's one more idea, and that's that these are not rated equally. So, especially in the West and especially in the United States, we take more seriously things like liberty, utility, and equality, and fairness. Just if you look at how we organize our society, we promote these things. If you look at the history of at least Western thought, they promote these more so than they promote solidarity, trust, and transparency. No, maybe we want to change the weights, but if we look at how we behave and how we actually write, then that would suggest that the ones that a covert program better promotes are the ones that we weight more heavily. Those are the ones that we think are more important. So that's roughly the argument that it should be covert rather than overt. What about logistics? That can be really hard. So is it going to be any harder than organizing an entire policy and action to prevent global warming, or just to halt the increase in global temperature? Is that going to be any easier? Is it going to be in conjunction with policies that decrease nuclear proliferation, in conjunction with policies that better protect research from getting outside of the lab? So we could have one covert moral bioenhancement, mandatory for everyone, to prevent ultimate harm, or we could have a conjunction of a lot of different other overt policies, which is more logistically difficult. I think it's not clear. But if one objects to the notion that we shouldn't engage in a covert moral bioenhancement program on the grounds that logistically it's not possible, I don't see that the alternatives are any easier. All right, so I hope just in this few short minutes I've maybe not convinced you of three, but at least got you to think that, hey, maybe he's not totally nuts. So maybe you're not as horrified as maybe you started out. I actually think this is what we should do. I think we are obligated to do it. But I think that I can support it further, and I'll just do this very quickly, with a sort of a side argument. And that's the idea that we should engender moral transhumans or moral postpersons. So these are people who, through moral bioenhancement, are so much better than us that they have a different moral status. So they can't be properly called humans because they are so much better than us. They are to us as we are to chimpanzees or as we are to dogs, as far as moral status goes. Now this depends on the idea that there are gradations of moral status that extend beyond humans. So some people think that there's a threshold between persons and non-persons, and anything that meets that threshold is of equal moral status. So chimpanzees don't meet the threshold, but humans do, and so does any other more advanced being would also meet that. But we can also have different views about moral status, such as it's a more continuous scale based on a person's interests or their capacity for interest. In any case, I think we should bring about these people who are better than us. One problem that people have with bringing about moral transhumans is that they think we should be afraid of them for the same reason that non-human primates should be afraid of us. So we exploit non-human primates pretty frequently to achieve some other benefit for us, not for them, but to work in our interests. And they're of marginally lower moral status. That's debatable, but we do pretty nasty things to them for the sake of ourselves. The worry is if we bring about these moral postpersons or these moral transhumans, they'll do to us what we do to non-human primates. But I don't think they would. In fact, I think they will be better just in virtue of, this might be a conceptual point, by necessity they might be better than mere persons or better than the best of us. So if we want to, if we're considering whether to bring about moral postpersons, moral transhumans, we should look to see who the best of us are and then say, hey, moral postpersons are going to be even better than that. We should look to our moral exemplars. When we do that, we find that I don't think there's much to be worried about. So the first man here is Leopold Sosha, who was a Holocaust rescuer in Poland. He, for quite a long time, at the threat of his own life, sacrificed himself and his own interests to save the life of people escaping the Polish ghetto through the sewers. He was, in fact, he died rescuing not a Holocaust survivor, but his own daughter from an oncoming Russian truck. So he gave his life, he sacrificed his own interests purely to advance the interests of others. And then we have Jean Vanier on the right, who is a more recent philosopher and priest who started what are called the LARC communities, the French term L''ARCHG. And these are communities that take in intellectually disabled people, adults, and put them in a position, give them a lot of love, a strong social network, all the resources they can to allow that person to flourish. And again, at the sacrificing their own personal interests. And so if these are examples of the best humans, I think we can expect moral transhumans to be even better, which is to say, they will be even better at sacrificing their own interests for the sake of ours. So if we want to be safe, if we want to be safe from climate change and nuclear proliferation and weapons of mass destruction, we should want to bring out these people because they I think, will save us from ourselves. And if they are more like Jean Vanier, and they want to do things that will help us flourish, we might even get to sort of a utopia, making us the best possible humans we can be. Okay, and I think we do all of that through compulsory moral bioenhancement. So what's the best way to bring about most persons? Make moral bioenhancement mandatory and converted. That's all I have. Thanks.
Any questions?
Okay, I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So I'm just, I can't help but thinking this is like an episode of Black Mirror. So you claim that all people are bad. You think that at some level all people are bad.
No, I don't think that. I think we're all deficient in something.
Okay. And you say like we can't trust politicians at some level and we can't trust scientists at some level. So who do you see administering this, covertly or overtly?
I'll volunteer myself.
Okay. So that was going to be another question: is would you voluntarily take
100%.
bioenhancements?
Yeah.
Do you think you would still be able to administer it morally? Like, do you feel like administering it covertly or overtly, like, is something you could do morally?
Definitely, because I think it's the morally obligatory act.
Okay. Okay. Let me assess my questions. Something that you mentioned was that, like, if people like overtly knew that they were getting bioenhanced, that they would be able to like override it at some level, or be able to like recognize that like these aren't my thoughts. Like, do you think that even if it was covert, like the really bad people who are trying to like start nuclear wars and blow things up would like be able to recognize or like find their way out of it?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So suppose we have someone that's like the Osama bin Laden, really a bad person, and we make them a really good person, that's a huge swing, maybe a very, very noticeable swing. And so it requires the bioenhancement, whatever the mechanism, to provide not only new moral beliefs or new moral judgments, but also new evidence for those. So that when they say, hey, when something says, hey, now I don't want to go and murder a bunch of people, maybe that's not what you're saying, but I don't want to go do that thing, here's why I don't want to do it. So it would have to be, we would have to do something to guard against that. There is some evidence that people with antisocial personality disorder are helped by oxytocin, and it would be an interesting question to see if they've recognized in themselves being a good person. So this is something we could test.
Okay. Now I have one more question. So if there is some like inevitable apocalypse caused by global warming or something not human created, and we are all morally enhanced at this point, do you think that our morals would have to change in this new apocalyptic world? And then if we were, if we were throwing up every time we were lying, and now we have to kind of deal with this new apocalyptic state, like, would that, in this dystopian apocalyptic world be beneficial, or do you think that it kind of is only applicable right now?
Well, so is your question, are we better off if we're antisocial when we're walking down the road?
I guess my question was, like, if you say that, like, the end of the world is coming anyway, and your and your claim is, like, we will be able to, like, let's say in this example, like, we survived the apocalypse and we're living in this, like, dust land or whatever. Do you think that the morals that we were enhanced with in this current state would still carry over to this new world?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess I have a question also, but number one, how do you account for like cultural differences in what's in the world?
I don't think there are. I think any apparent disagreements are factual disagreements. No.
Okay, and then like what happens if you start this? Okay, then like 200 years from now, we're living in this like beautiful moral society. Great. But like, so it's like kind of like a vaccine thing, right? Like all those vaccine preventable diseases are now eradicated. People don't understand what the harm is in not vaccinating, and so then they stop vaccinating, and now we have these outbreaks, right? So what's to stop somebody who's like grown up in this perfectly moral society, centuries from now, to start doing immoral things on the basis of they have no concept of this thing being immoral, I guess?
Well, if they're getting the enhancement, they would be doing what we want them to do.
But like, so I guess there's like, I mean.
So is your question that because they have no contrast with the bad,
Yeah.
you can only know good unless you know
what's
good?
bad if you, I mean, how do you recognize that this is a bad thing if you've never seen it be a bad thing?
We don't need them to do that. We just need them to recognize the good thing.
Okay, so then third question, like, how do you, I mean, it's great that you're just like inject somebody with this like theoretical equalizer that fixes all of our problems, great. But then there's this whole like societal thing too, right? Of like, again, I guess, I mean, they say bought to like ladies in medicine, for example, of like us coming in, there's going to be a culture change, but you have to wait for the older people to die out. This is a very slow process because as much as the culture changes little by little, it's a very slow change, right? So I guess how do you expect people to just like wake up one morning and just decide like, I'm not going to be a jerk anymore, and I'm going to only do these nice right things just because they're like ignoring the environmental impact of the change in hormone levels of transformers.
So it doesn't have to be an immediate thing. It could be gradual. But we all develop early over our lives. Like I'm a better person now than I was when I was 19, and that's because I've through some slow, difficult process, gone through some sort of moral education. But I would have been much happier had that been sped up. If I could become the person I am now when I was 20, I wouldn't be the person I am now. I would be much better.
Also, many questions, but I'm going to focus in on one. So, kind of the same idea is culturally, just currently in like a Western society, I would argue that autonomy is very, very important, specifically in the United States society. Again, going back to vaccines, in pediatrics, we get questions daily about why do I need the flu vaccine? Why do I need the HPV vaccine? Like we require things like MMR and polio, but other things like the flu, HPV, they're not required, and parents want to know everything, full gamut. So autonomy is super, super important in like the United States culture. And I guess I disagree that like even covertly you will be stepping on people's autonomy because you're doing something without any knowledge to them. And though they would then gain this morality from it and then supposedly see the better for it, I still feel like you're almost trampling on like what in the United States we value as a very core value, and like the idea that we have this free will and this free choice based on knowledge that we're given, right? We all have an option to do the surgery or not do the surgery, get the flu vaccine or not get the flu vaccine. And do I think people should get vaccinated? 100%. But I don't think it's my right to force like the flu vaccine on everyone. I guess that's my biggest struggle.
Yeah. So if something like moral bioenhancement undermines free will, it's only in virtue of some sort of causal connection that it intervenes upon between a person's the beliefs and judgments and decisions that they perceive themselves as being freely made, and whatever causes it. But I think that most of our judgments and beliefs are caused in a similar way. So when we go into the grocery store and we choose Coke over Pepsi because it's on our left and Pepsi's on our right, that's not. I mean, that's a similarly free choice or unfree,
Sure.
as the case may be, as a moral bioenhancement would be. I think we overestimate the amount of, or the degree to which our beliefs are made out of our own wills, of our own choice. And I think that if moral bioenhancement is a threat to our power to choose, then almost everything else in our environment similarly threatens our power to choose.
I can't help but think that every major genocide in recorded history is someone implementing compulsory cover for one kind of cancer. Just look at Crutchfield, take over the New World, I grew up in religious populations, slavery,
Yeah,
Christianity.
absolutely right.
We pulled up Osama bin Laden as a horribly immoral person, yet there are millions and millions of people who think he was doing the right thing. I get that. The devil.
Yeah, and when I was submitting the second paper, this was a comment that reviewers kept hammering on. You're justifying totalitarianism, or relying on totalitarianism. And the main difference is, in all of those other situations, there were much better ways. Let's say they had, I'm not saying they did, but let's suppose they had an admirable goal. They just had a really bad way of achieving it. There were a lot of other better ways, ones that didn't kill and maim and murder a bunch of others.
Well, it's just like a settling, European settling,
Yeah.
America. Yeah, we could kill them, or we could, send them we could remove them from their indigenous cultures and send them to boarding schools, or somehow reindoctrinate. Is that a great thing?
No, because there were better ways of doing it. In the case of moral bioenhancement, there is no better way of doing it. That's why the first part is important, because it's necessary to achieve it.
See, you have to hypothesize that there is a model of morality that is right, absolute, and everybody buys it.
All I need is that the utility of preventing ultimate harm is greater than the cost of not doing it. And so
some people think that wiping out an entire population is avoiding harm to a greater good, but it's spiritually.
So they are almost 100% wrong. But I think we can all agree that there is nothing better than preventing ultimate harm, and correspondingly nothing worse than allowing it to happen.
Ultimate harm being the death of the individual.
Of everyone, in a really suffering way.
I have two questions. One is, so what if our for oral bioenhancement has side effects? Either it could be any sort, but let's say it's like we get aromatic mushrooms and they have this moment of like spiritual connection with everyone, except for some people take it and for some other reason they either die or have some injury because of this, but overall, if you don't take this early, everyone will be ultimately what will harm. Some people will either die or have some sort of detriment. Would that still be worth it?
It would depend on the risk and the prevalence, but yeah, and we do that with drugs all the time. Like we accept some percentage of people are going to die from adverse events just for the and Tylenol doesn't prevent multiple harm.
So this whole basically based upon the premise that you're preventing apocalypse. I mean, I guess intuition tells me that people are going to predicting an apocalypse, like on the edge of that. Since the Bible was written and even before then, is there anything to that?
So when the Bible was written, there were no nuclear weapons, and that were being handed out on the black market to people who want to use them on people. There were no scientists cooking up strains of bird flu that are immune to vaccine and easily transmitted fluids.
I guess to me it's still kind of an illusion that the idea, the fear that there's an oncoming apocalypse is almost an illusion, and that you're better off just treating that fear than trying to change everything so that prevent something that, I mean, I guess just because it's never happened in the past, it won't happen, but I think that it's kind of a, if people are predicting it since the beginning of time, but it's never happened, then I think chances that it is going to happen pretty low. That's not something else personally.
Well, they're certain with the death of the son. So that's certain. Well, as certain as our best scientific theories are. Okay. I'll consider myself deluded. Yes.
So, universal, mandatory, compulsory, and secret. How is that possible?
Well,
Somebody's got to know that.
yeah. So
Lots of people would have to know that.
And their children.
Right?
well, define lots. 1 million? Probably fewer. The problem would be the people who are a threat to us are the people who have access to all the information and the things that are going to kill us. So we would need it because, well, many of us drove here when we could have either not come or walked or ridden our bikes, or if there was Skype available, we had steak, some of us, or we all did things to make things worse off. So we're the people who need it. We could easily get it. Most of us drink probably public water in some way. So the people who are a threat are the people who are also most easily accessed. Now then there's the additional question of, let's say it takes 100,000 people to organize this. It's going to get out, right? Unless they're morally against themselves, in which case it wouldn't.
Should we program machines to do this, and then just let machines do it?
We could, though they wouldn't have the excellent moral judgment that the people administering this will.
My question's more about tracking immoral behavior. In this society where we're all morally enhanced, wouldn't our default be to trust one another? Therefore, even these higher beings that we're going to try to make super moral, would their judgment on somebody's morality also be skewed just by the fact that we're bioenhancing them? Therefore, how do we track if somebody's being immoral and try to, because medications don't work for everyone or something might not, some bodies might process whatever differently. So how do we track them and make sure that we enhance them in a different way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it does. And I don't think it has to be any different than we do it now. We use social pressures to track that and shape it. In fact, if we moral education over the long term, the way we're doing it now, I think actually works. I think it works quite well. But I don't think it stops those bad actors. That one person who can wipe us all out. I don't think it stops that. Where moral violence would. So if the threat of ultimate harm were not so present, we could be totally fine with just run-of-the-mill moral education that we already do. and included in that is are the social pressures that we put on others to conform in more acceptable ways. Am I out of time?
We'll probably take one more question.
I really like your nod to virtual ethics at the end, because in my own head, when you're talking about COVID versus overt programs, I was getting like Plato and Aristotle. And so I was wondering, obviously an overt program, right? Like the programs and snowbirds and drone things like that. When you're rolling out this design, you're talking about a covert program of transhumans. Don't you think they'd be noticed, just like the moral exemplars have been noticed by our society? Right? So would it maybe an overt program be a little more?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I haven't thought about that. Yeah, good point. I'll take that into consideration.
Charlie?
So, a lot of work gets done by the highly likely to bring absolute line. Like,
Yeah.
I'm suspicious about what's really going to play. But if it's true, that'd make a community with stronger conclusions than.
Okay, that I'd like to hear.
I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't authorize the use of those spots every time a politician pushes us with 2 minutes on the doomsday clock. So we should whack doomsday Christian from that or I'm not sure. I mean, like, maybe touching on.
Wouldn't it have been better though to just morally enhance them?
I mean, there's put some guys in a helicopter flying down to, flying wherever, and 2 bullets pretty quick.
But in that case, it would be, if we care about liberty, that would restrict liberty more. And so a moral bioenhancement would restrict liberty less. So if other things being equal is going to achieve the same end, hit squads are worse than moral bioenhancement.
But the point is, we don't have to control it, right?
Right.
So we should be doing this now because we do the bullets.
For some things, for some people, we probably should.
So it counts specialism, but it's deep.
It definitely does, yes.
All right, I think it's a couple of
Just a quick question. Do you believe that manipulation falls under your definition of good morals?
Well, I think my definition of good morals, or everyone else's definition of good morals.
Well, you're the one administering it according to you. So do you feel like manipulation would fall into your enhanced morality?
Yes, and I think we all agree on that, right? Because we're all manipulated constantly. So if we have a problem with being manipulated, we need to do a lot of different things, or be okay with the fact that we are manipulated.
I think your next step in terms of providing this is to go to actually gene editing with CRISPR and gene engines. We can now go into people and actually edit the genes and insist that offspring, both chromosomes and all offspring, will carry that trait around. So if you want people to have a higher oxytocin level without giving it to you, for them to generate it, we can find areas where that might be deficient. We can change that.
Yeah,
That's done in labs now.
I have a paper that's currently under review arguing that exact point.
So you're gonna want to, and when we generate these things, 10 generations off, if you have enough people, the whole population gets it without having the problem of dosing them and getting the right dosage on it.
Right, so that's one more question here. Was there another one over there? You're going to have the last word.
If you indulge in the concept of a utopia, of this perfect society in which everybody's moral, everybody's good, is there not then a danger of humanity just stagnating as a species? If we reach this perceived ideal, everything's good, everything's perfect, if there being here, just stop eating and just growing soft and just never reaching a higher point because we think we've reached
There might be, and I'm absolutely okay with that. If we're at that point where things are as good as they can get, I'm absolutely satisfied with that, and I think everyone should be satisfied with that.
But isn't there then, what if what we think is good, and then we would never think, what if we push past this, then we would just stop there and move forward?
is a danger of that, and I'm okay with it.
All right, that's going to be it. I'm sure I'm going to stick around maybe for a couple extra questions if people want to hang around. So